All right, just some general information I'm going to start with, so I don't keep repeating it as we go through. And I told you some of this stuff when we talked about this at the meeting not too long ago. Some of the paragraphs and topics have changed areas, like they're in a different location. So you'll kind of see that as we go along. I'm not going to say every time this used to be a different number or something like that. It'll be they thought they grouped it better to make sense, and it's not anything too unusual there. We have contracts here, if you want one.
Oh, thank you.
A new draft one. There you go. Okay. There you go.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. And when you're filling out, well, and here's interesting news. It's 10 pages, not including the BIA, so that's that. We'll just get that out of the way right away. When you're filling out the WIN forms, filling out the contract on WIN forms, you're going to check boxes for various addenda. And when you check the box for another, like an advisory or an addendum or a disclosure or something, WIN forms will put that into your transactions. So you won't be able to forget. We have contracts right here, if you want to pick one up. Okay. And when you're typing on any blank lines, including the name line, but on any of the blank lines like additional terms, if you go too long, it will just flow into an addendum for you. So it will allow you to be as long-winded as you want to be. So you'll want to think about, do you want it into an addendum, or do you want to keep it within the time frame you have? But anyway, that's on everything. So just those are a few little comments to kind of get started. And then Travis and I both took a class from Gov Hutchison for 3 hours, and we don't want you to have to sit here for 3 hours, so I'm not going to maybe hit every single thing, but I'm going to try to hit the really important stuff. And then also, I know you're going to have questions, and probably I won't be able to answer everything, so just to let you know, I have another class I'm taking the first week of November, so Lori's going to take notes and write down things. If there's something I don't know, I'll follow up, and we have some time because we don't have to do this till November. We have contracts there. Okay. All right, so page 1. The first thing I want to talk about is number 1. I'm going to go paragraph numbers because some of the page numbers got cut off. But on paragraph 1, D, this is just a little thing, but if you're filling it out on WIN forms, you will not be able to put a date and the days for after acceptance. I know most of us probably know not to do that, but sometimes, I don't know if you've ever seen an offer that they put both. You can't do that anymore. It won't work. Number 1D.
Oh, sorry.
Just that you can't put, so many days after acceptance plus put a date, because often those won't match. So just a little thing. Then on E, on 1E, they added wording that says that the brokers are not parties to this agreement. The buyer and the seller are parties. And so that you'll see wording throughout the purchase agreement about the parties doing this or that. That's not us, which is very good to make clear, but they don't always say buyer or seller. They'll say one party or another party. It's just a little clarification. On C, 1C, no, I'm sorry, 2C, sorry. 2C, competing buyers and sellers. We used to have a form called the DA that not all that many people used, but it basically specified that we could represent more than one buyer or seller. And the reason why this becomes important is it's one thing you might disclose if you personally are representing more than one buyer or seller, but we work under the umbrella of RE/MAX of an agency, a broker, and so what if Jane is representing one seller and Jim is representing another, or one buyer representing another? We're disclosing to the parties that the company may be representing more than one person in a transaction. So because it's in here and the box comes checked that we will have a possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, we're probably going to start using that form. But if you have used the DA, it basically replaces that. Okay, number 3A, this is kind of a little one, but the default is now that the buyer is going to direct deposit electronically their deposit into escrow. That's now a default. You can change it. You can take a check. You can, they can do whatever they want, but that's the default. So that's the expectation. The other thing it says in 3A2, down a little past towards the bottom of 2 before B, it says that if you say you have a check, you're supposed to have a check. Don't just have a copy of the check. You can give the listing agent a copy, but if you, the buyer's agent, check the box that say you have a check, you're not supposed to just have the copy. So for many, many reasons, of course, it's very nice if the buyer puts their money directly into escrow. But just to let you know, those are a little bit of a change. Okay, 3C, they moved this. I'm not going to say that every time they move things, but they did put the all-cash offer clause in with the financing area, or the money issues. And basically now the default is that the verification of funds need to come with the offer. But you can change it. I mean, you can check the box that says 3 days, or you could write 7 days, or whatever. But most people do that. So I think they're reflecting what's kind of become common. The default is that you would bring in the funds, the verification of funds, right when you write the offer. And I think that's it for that page. So one down.
Just as a side note, Claudia,
yes.
Since you're now saying that this possible representation form, which was just not used, does this mean that we will have it on the transaction checklist?
That possible representation of more than one buyer.
We're debating that right now.
Yeah.
Am I clear that that is replacing the DA?
That was my understanding. That's what I remember and had a note that Gov said at the training. Do you want me to clarify that? But that's what I remember. So. Sorry.
And given the fact that it's checked, will it produce the form?
According to what I've been told, yes.
So we will definitely get it.
Yeah, it'll be included. So yeah, because it's pre-checked. Yeah.
Requiring it, then it should be on the checklist.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does that play out with the templates that some of us have already? I guess it'll just add it, duplicate it.
It'll add it. Well, and if the DA is not there anymore, then it wouldn't. You may have to reset up the templates. I mean, I didn't ask that question. That's a good question. Lori, maybe write that down about resetting templates. That's a good one. Okay. Okay. Page 2 on HI. Basically, nowadays on I and 1 and 2, they separated the loan contingency from the appraisal contingency. I mean, I know they sort of work together, but they did make them 2 separate contingencies in the new purchase agreement. This is a good one to tell you. I number 2, basically, they did.
J2?
Did I go to J? Oh, I wrote over J. I'm so sorry. J2. Yes. Sorry. Can't read my writing. Sorry. Okay. J2. Basically, now in this case, they didn't put that your letter of your loan approval letter is default included. They gave you a chance to either say it's attached or that you would provide it. But something that's not in here anymore, maybe it's J3, is it does not say that the loan contingency can remain in effect until the loan is funded. So that's not there anymore. I mean, yeah. So we don't have to hunt for that. Yeah, so that's no longer there. And then we talked about this before. I think most people have heard this part, but on 3 it says that the loan contingency remains in effect for 21 days by default. Of course, you can change it. You can put whatever you want, but the default is 21 days now. So now if we just go per the purchase agreement, we've got a 17-day contingency on almost everything except the loan contingency is 21, unless you change it. Okay. Number J5, lender limits on buyer credits. This is new. And basically, it's kind of what I think most people do it this way. But if you write a purchase agreement and you say you have $10,000 that the seller's going to pay of the buyer's closing cost, the buyer's closing cost is only 8. They only get 8. So you want to kind of plan that ahead, because I know sometimes those closing cost credits are could be used for carpet or for repairs or all kinds of things. So you do want to kind of double check that, because if you have more credit than you have closing costs to use it for, it will default and go down to that amount, the maximum of the closing cost, okay? Escrow would be adjusting that downward. Okay. Let's see, the next thing, number 4 is where you would put a COP if you have one. Number 5, this is good to know, on addenda and advisories, these are the additional forms that can become part of the purchase agreement. And if you look through here, you'll see that there's no SPQ.
Yes.
Seller property questionnaire. It's that 4-page kind of history of the property disclosure. So it's no longer there. There is a place for it. It is part of the purchase agreement, but it's not part of the forms that have to go to the lender to cause us trouble. So that's good. The other thing I'll just kind of cover briefly here, it'll come up again a little bit, is remember we used to have a PAA, purchase agreement addendum. We still do, but they're actually discontinuing that, and they're going to have those 5 individual clauses will each be an addendum that you can use. The 5 clauses were seller in possession, this isn't in order, backup offer addendum, tenant in possession, court confirmation, and secondary financing. So the ones we probably used the most were the seller in possession or maybe backup offer. You'll see under number 5 that it does have a place for the backup offer. It does have a place for the court confirmation addendum. But I just want to point that out as now we'll use the individual addendum for the issue that we need it for, if that makes sense. We don't have to use the longer one now. Okay. Yeah, and so all of these would be subject to the lender wanting to see these, so just so you know. Now, this is another little change here that we'll probably talk about. Number 7, allocation of costs, talking about reports and inspections. So on 7A1, they have the natural hazard disclosure. It probably would be a really good idea to check that new little optional box for environmental and tax reports, especially the tax report. I know I've occasionally gotten an NHD without that. That's how you can give the official Mello-Roos disclosure that we're required to give. So it's a good idea to have that. And if you put it in here, even if you're with some other escrow company that maybe orders it and doesn't remember that, then you'll have, a record that that's what you requested and require. So I think that's good they added that. Now, number 2, 7A2, is buyer or seller can pay for the following report. The following report can be whatever you want. So what a lot of people do, they put the buyer is going to pay for the physical inspection report. If you want a termite report, this is where you're going to put it. Buyer or seller can pay for the termite report. They're making the termite report completely negotiable. You'll see, we'll talk about it more later. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about it more later. But it's going to be part of the request for repairs now. It's going to be dealt with during escrow unless you're proactive and do something up front about it. And I'll just be honest, Travis and I were talking about this a little while ago. This is something I think we're not quite sure how this is going to play out in real life. The reason for it, as I understand it, and this is the good part, is it gets it out of the lender's world. So that part, I think, can be good. But it postpones a rather large negotiation into the transaction that we previously dealt with up front. The other thinking that Gov. Hutchison said on this issue is that if we just did the WPA as we've always done, it's like the seller's writing a blank check unless you did your termite inspection first. But, that's what they were trying to prevent, because now it becomes completely negotiable. So I can see some positives and I can see some issues that we're going to be dealing with. It's totally optional. If you want it, you have to write it in.
If we include it here, then does it become in the lender's domain?
Okay, technically no, but let me tell you something Patty told me. And again, this is one of those things we'll have to see how it works. And Travis was actually talking to some other brokers about what they're expecting to do, and we'll get a little bit more feedback as we get a little closer to it, because it's not in place yet. But technically it won't. But what Patty told me is that the lender requires a HUD in the very beginning. And so, you might have certain costs on that HUD that they expect. And then let's say 10 days into it, you negotiate that there's going to be fees paid. Maybe the buyer's going to pay some, maybe the seller, to get a clearance. Then the HUD's going to change, and they may want documentation on the change. But I think we don't know the answer yet. So technically, the idea was to get it out of what the lender would be involved in. So they can't ask you to do a Section 2, or they can't say everything, the HOA has to do everything before closing, which they're not going to do.
Repair and termite is optional. Both.
Correct. It's negotiable. It's negotiable.
Excuse me, but I think one of the things that Jim was asking is that if you put down here, buyer and seller, or buyer to pay for an inspection report, or their own inspection. Well, the buyer's got the right to do however many inspections they want.
Absolutely.
Roof, pool, spa. You don't have to write it in. It's their option to do it or not. But the moment you put down that the buyer is to, or the seller is to pay for a termite report, then the lender's going to say, well, I know the seller paid for one. I just want to see it.
I suppose they could, but you think how a lot of people write their offers now on the old form is on that blank form where buyer or seller can pay for blank. A lot of people put buyer physical inspection, and lenders don't ask for it. Now, I can't say that some aggressive underwriter may not ask for it, but generally they don't, in my experience anyway. I don't think they do. So I think because it's in this category, the expectations lenders aren't going to ask for it. Just like they don't ask for physical inspections now.
Or they don't ask for the NHD either.
Yeah.
Well, the appraisers are asking for it, though. The appraisers walking into properties are...
And asking for an NHD?
Particularly FHA appraisers are walking in to say, just show me your inspection report. Saves them work, and they just say, okay, yeah, there's a leaky faucet here, there's this, and they literally write all the negatives from the inspection report as a condition for the loan. That's what, because when they're asking for it, the only protection you have is to outsmart the appraiser and to say, geez, golly, I wish I could give it to you. But you see this form here? The buyer said that he didn't want an inspection. And then you've got something signed that says the buyer is not going to do an inspection. But then I suppose you could say you're lying.
The buyer sees it. We don't know. Inspector is bad.
But the FHA in particular, these guys are just trying to say, I'm going to make my life easy, show me the inspection, and write it all up.
Yes.
Since this section, it says inspections, reports, and certificates. So let's say if I'm representing the buyer and I say seller to mark the seller's box for termite completion report.
Okay.
Would that mean that the seller is obligated to pay for the termite report and get the certificate completion report?
I'm not sure, but there's another way to do it. There's going to be some blank lines where we can say buyer or seller to pay, and which we're going to get to on the next page. And the thought is it could be written on that, seller to pay for all section termite work in order to provide clearance or something like that. I think it'd be, to my way of thinking, it'd be better to keep it as clear as possible. I mean, that might work, but I think if you made it very clear, seller to pay for Section 1 termite work and provide clearance on another line where you actually have room to write it. Yes?
It highlights it in 7A.
Okay.
Paragraph highlighted, so this does not determine.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
You have to consider
Yeah. This paragraph, actually it says this paragraph only determines, so Travis and I were talking earlier about adding that they would pay for termite completion, but it says the whole paragraph. But that's A, so we're good. I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. Okay, trying to outsmart this thing. Yeah, the term, one more quick thing before I forget. The term that Gov used about putting the termite here is that it would be outside of the contract. I kind of have that in quotes, that's what he said. That's the reasoning for putting it here and not having it on the addenda or advisories, is that it would be outside of the contract. Yeah.
It says later in your buyer investigations, a buyer can do their own termite. There's a big old paragraph all about it.
Right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it actually, well, the question or the comment was that it says later that the buyer, there's a whole paragraph about the buyer can do their own inspections, so of termites or whatever they want.
It's not written on there, the buyer can still do any amount of inspection.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, Claudia.
Sure.
But the WPA is still a form, or
No.
no longer?
Well, it won't be mentioned in the purchase agreement at all.
Right, but
I don't,
is it in the wind form?
I don't think
It is
so.
in wind forms, but they did remove the backup buyer position from it. That's all I can tell you, but I checked it last week and it was there.
But it's there now, but is it going to be in November? That's the question. Could you write that down? That's a good, what I remember is it's no longer going to be there, but I guess I want to be sure I understood it right.
No WPA.
Okay, good. That's what I remembered. Okay, good. Okay. Okay.
Did you give us our RE/MAX policy for it?
We said that we weren't sure how this, we don't have a policy, but we don't know how this is going to shake out because it's so new, and we're going to do some more research because we have a little time before this becomes in effect. And we talked about the positives and negatives, so positives are the lender won't be involved, at least that's the intention, we'll see. And negative might be that it postpones more of a negotiation. So, okay. Are we kind of okay on that? Is okay as we're going to be? Yes, sir?
The one question that I'm just trying to clear my mind is, these changes were to clarify. Am I missing something?
Thank you, Kevin.
Dreamer.
I mean,
I don't remember ever hearing that.
but I mean, seriously, I mean, it doesn't, the changes you usually are trying to alleviate problems or issues or things that you've had. And is this not complicating them?
I think the problem,
And I'm just, maybe I'm missing something.
Which one? Do you have a specific one?
so about the termite, yeah.
It does, well, I think the reason for that is, we've understood from them, is that it is a problem in the transaction.
Right.
Because it's listed, and then all of a sudden the lender wants it to become a problem. So to cure that, they've come up with this solution. Is it the right solution? I don't know, but that's what it's a solution for, in their eyes.
But the solution from the WPA, and I just addressed that one, is if you have a WPA in the contract today,
Oh, right. Everything's
and,
like
and
them.
you're using
Yes.
it, the lender wants it.
That's
Okay,
right.
So now we're excluding it.
Good point.
But also, the lender today, if you have requests for repairs, the lender wants it. So we're just bringing it back into the lender's hands again.
The lender asked for requests for repairs? You're getting that? Did I? Okay. Yeah, I haven't gotten that. Well, I don't, one thing is they come up with things we've never heard of sometimes, so that's a possibility. Nestor just brought up a really good point that I didn't think to bring up, but at the class that we took, something Gov Hutchison talked about quite a few times is that a lot of these changes are making our system more like what they do in Northern California. Yeah. And it has been tested there, and it seems to work there. I'm not saying that, that's great, but that's where they came up with some of these things, because they felt that doing it this way has solved some of the problems they've had. And I'll also say something else Gov said a few times is he said, I can't always answer the why. I'm only here to teach you what we're doing now.
And to my point on the WPA is, if the work was going to be done, the properties couldn't close prior to, and why is that going to change now if it's a termite and that it's supposed to be done and we're hiding it from the lender now? Is that what?
No. Well, it's not hidden, but it's like in most cases, I mean, Linda's had something different, but in most cases, I think we don't give the physical inspection to the lender. So it's thought to be dealt with like that, where we don't give the termite inspection to the lender. It's something between the buyer and the seller. The seller could say cap. They'll say, I'll pay up to $1,000 of termite clearance. The buyer has to pay the rest. They can say, I'm not paying anything. The buyer can say, I'm paying it all. We can sort of set it up like we've been doing it, where the seller pays it all, but it's between the buyer and seller.
Reoccurring and non-reoccurring closing costs. And you don't say that you're doing the termite work with it, they get the money instead.
Yeah, it's negotiable. Lumped into I didn't print it out, but I can print it later. I just thought we had enough paper, but I'll show you the request for repair when we get to that part, the way that they've dealt with it. It's right on the request for repair. Sorry, Jean, sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't know whether this is going to answer your question or it doesn't change a thing. But in Irvine, it's been years since I've had a lender ask for a termite report. They don't care. We have to get them done. Because it's going to
I have one closing
No.
Thursday.
Okay.
They care, Jane.
I've never
It's just
asked them
escrow,
care.
but escrow takes care of it.
But also about repairs. And I'm wondering if they don't care to see about repairs, request repairs and that they're done in Irvine, but they might in other parts of California, and this has been written for all of California. But it,
My question is now, if there's a request for repairs, it's not a contingency, you get to the end and the sellers haven't done it.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is all they can do is go to court and try to sue.
Yes.
Susan and I did a deal in, remember that $9,000 worth of termite work over in Deerfield.
With Lorraine, yeah.
That's a serious problem at the end of escrow if the sellers haven't done it.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I mean, that's going to be, we're going to have some.
And just for what you just said, Gov reiterated that. I had a note about that very thing. That, yeah, because it's not the walkthrough is not a contingency, and you're not allowed to postpone closing technically for that. I mean, I suppose you could, but you're not supposed to. And that the remedy is to take them to small claims court or whatever. Again, it could be more than that if it's a big enough problem. Yes.
Claudia, can I just ask?
Yes, please. Okay, let's listen.
If we're representing the buyer and we want to address that up front, so I was thinking in paragraph 6 where it says other terms on page 2, just typing in that seller shall pay section 1 of termite, and then of course checking the box in 7.2 and checking seller shall pay the following report.
Well,
or should we do the separate addendum?
On the next page, there's a place for buyer and seller. I know, it's okay. Let me just address that. One, we're figuring that out, but 2, on the next page, there's a whole list of buyer or seller to pay for this or that, and I think you could put it on that, which I'll talk about in just a minute. Let me just kind of work down to that.
Did you say there's no WPA in there?
Correct. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Correct. Yes, that's true. Okay, on the next page, if you have a page number, it's page 3. It's B is at the top, government requirements. It just adds in carbon monoxide detector, pretty easy. It's on the TDS, so not any big deal there. We've all been doing that for a while. Okay. So now, I'm sorry.
Sorry, are we not doing the CMD after November then?
The what?
The CMD
Carbon monoxide detector.
Since it is on CBS and it's called up here, or do you still want some more?
Lori, can you write that down?
Good. Yeah. Okay. Okay, if you go down to C, right below it, C1C, it basically says that everyone needs to sign escrow instructions, buyer and seller, within 5 days. So that's kind of nice to move that up. Move it along. I mean, you can change it if your client's, in Europe for a week or something. You could change that. But the point is that it does give us some protection against people that just wait forever to sign, which is a good thing.
Why do they call it escrow holder general provisions rather than escrow instructions?
I do not know. Alan asked why they're calling it provisions instead of instructions.
The instructions is this.
Yeah, this is part of it. So maybe they mean the part that escrow generates. Maybe that could be.
Escrow instructions are a duplication for contract usually.
Whether or not that would be considered a default or anything, or
I have a note on that. Let me look at. Nestor asked if Gov asked if that could be a default. He said you can't. I knew I had a note. You can't cancel if they miss it.
can or cannot?
Cannot.
Okay.
Cannot. That's what he said. Yeah, good question.
Can you give a notice to perform?
You could probably give a notice to perform. He didn't say that, but I do have a specific note I remember that he said that's not one of the provisions you could cancel over, but it's trying to enforce getting people to sign sooner rather than later so escrow can do their job.
So So how do you do it when they don't sign it?
I guess you could do a notice to perform. I mean, that would logically make sense. Yeah, that would logically make sense. Okay. Okay, on D, are we good? Okay, on D, this is a rather major change. D4, D3 says buyer or seller can pay homeowners association transfer fee, negotiable. D4 doesn't have any option to say anything other than seller shall pay HOA fees for preparing documents required to be delivered by Civil Code 4525. I've looked this up. I've talked to Sierra Legal because I'm like, what is that, Civil Code? It's basically all the normal HOA documents. Popular. Anyway, it's all the, the budget, the bylaws, the articles, all those things that the minutes are included in that Civil Code. So all the things you would normally order, escrow would normally order from HOA, they're saying the seller will pay for that. It's not even like they don't even have a place for us to mark buyer. Not exactly, but let me address that. There's a way to help deal with that, but let me kind of do that in order.
I have a question. How does the seller then go pay for it? And normally they have to receive it within a certain number of days, in your 17 days. And usually in the last contract, I thought it said that the seller was supposed to provide those to the buyer, or they had to review them within a certain time period.
Right. Well, they order them. Escrow's probably still going to order.
Not addressed here.
Not in this spot. It will be addressed later. It will. No, trust me, it does. It comes up. But I mean, it's just that, like, I don't want to get bogged down into like different tangents because it comes up pretty soon. Okay. We'll talk about it. I'll remind you. Okay. On D5, buyer or seller can pay HOA fees for preparing all documents other than those by that Civil Code, and that is the HOA cert basically. That's basically what it is. So if there's an HOA cert, you can specify who's going to pay for it. Thinking most buyers would pay for that, but whatever. That's negotiable. But I had to look that up because like what other documents are there? And long story short, it's HOA cert. Okay. Okay, what Travis and I were talking about a little earlier today was, for example, on 6 and 7, 7 and 8, right below that, you could potentially put that seller to pay for Section 1 termite repairs and provide clearance if you wanted to.
Since I know termite companies are familiar with what Section 1 is and what 2 is, but theoretically it's not in this contract.
It is in the request for repair. And actually, you know where that's defined? I hunted for that a long time one time, but that's defined in the BIA, what Section 1 and Section 2 is, which is still part of the agreement. So that's where the definition is. But Section 1 and Section 2 are referenced on the request for repair. So it's in there. Okay. All right. Just a little bit on other cost number 9 about the home warranty plan. It gives you the option to check the box that you want an upgraded home warranty plan. It also below gives the buyer an opportunity to waive a home warranty if you want to get that in writing. Just a little tip I learned from another agent 2 or 3 years ago that has helped me. You know how regarding options, some escrow companies don't like to order any options that are not written in. So I had an agent, this is a couple years ago on a listing I had, write in on that other any options chosen by buyer. And then that way the buyer could use up to the maximum of whatever they put as their cap. So for what it's worth. Because sometimes, after you have an inspection, you might want to add roof coverage. Maybe you didn't think you needed roof coverage. So, for example, if you put that, then it would take care of that problem. Just a thought. Okay. Okay, on 8, 8B, what's included, there's a place, if you look kind of in the middle, right above 3, B3, right above, it says that you can check that it includes all stoves, except all refrigerators, except all washers and dryers, except. So that would be a place, for example, if they want the garage refrigerator or they don't want the garage refrigerator, or if they want the wine fridge and they're getting the Sub-Zero in the kitchen or whatever, that's where you can spell those things out. So that's just a little bit different. Yes?
One of the things above that I think was important is it says items listed as included or excluded in the MLS are not included in the purchase.
Correct.
So unless you write it down,
That's a good thing to remind, yeah.
it's not gonna.
Yeah, that's
not gonna happen.
that's a good point, Michelle. Actually, that hasn't changed, but just for everyone's reference, if just because the MLS says it has something, you still need to write it in your purchase agreement to make it binding that it's included. If it's something like that normally wouldn't be included. Same with an exclusion. It all has to be spelled out here, so it's on this document. That's a good point. Okay, something else that is new is number 8B4, leased or liened items. The seller has to disclose anything they have that's leased that stays with the property.
Solar panels.
Yeah, solar panels now is a new thing. I mean, that's coming up more. Obviously security systems, we're used to that. Soft water systems, things of that nature. And they have to provide the information so that you know like what the fees are and what the terms are. So they have specified that. Okay, and then just below that in 8C, it just kind of covers at the end a little bit more detail on those brackets on the wall when you have a TV, above the fireplace or whatever. So just kind of spells out a few more details about that, just to kind of clear it as much as possible. Okay. Number 9, are we ready to move to the next page? Okay, just an easy little change. They made possession of the property at 6 p.m. instead of 5 p.m. No big deal there. On 9C, it references that if your seller is staying in the property even one day after closing, that's my words, but any time after closing, that you should do that CAR form SIP, seller in possession. Again, it used to be part of the PAA, Purchase Agreement Addendum, but now we have a specific form. So if they're staying anywhere from 1 day to 30 days, you do the SIP. If they're staying 30 days or more, or it says more than 30 days, I guess technically, you do the residential lease after sale. So not anything too new on it, but it's a good reminder to do the SIP, because a lot of people... Yes, exactly. Yes, that doesn't always. Oh, the lender. But it's always, you've always had to put in there. Well, I know most lenders allow up to 60 days. It's not too much of a problem, but yeah. Good point. Good point. Okay, let me see what we need to talk about next. Okay, now here's where we're going to find the SPQ. On number 10, if you look at number 10A2, we've got the statutory disclosures, and then a little bit below that is where the SPQ is. But anyway, it states very clearly that we should do an AVID, an agent visual inspection. It says we are to conduct a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection of accessible areas of the house. So it's not, you don't want to just write have an inspection or something like that. You want to show that you have looked at the house. And
is it mandatory, or is it so easy to transfer?
We'd really like the AVID. It's much more protecting for the agent to go room by room.
Has anybody ever said what you're supposed to say?
Travis, what do you... 1 second.
New carpets, new floors, new paint.
Okay.
New work.
I'm sorry, I didn't...
What is the appropriate
one
thing
sec.
to say on those rooms?
What you
New carpets,
see.
new paint. I mean, what are you going to say?
You say what you see. But we'll have a whole disclosure class, because we still need to do the same kind of disclosure we've always needed to do, and you're supposed to note anything that you saw when you did a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection. So, sorry. That's it. Okay. Then on number 3, the buyer can't waive, this is on, 10A3, the buyer cannot waive statutory disclosures or lead disclosures. Statutories are the ones we just read about in number 1, which is transfer disclosure, lead, SPQ or SSD. We need to do one or the other, and the booklet. But then on number 4, right below, this is where the SSD or SPQ comes in. It's now presumed that you're going to have one or the other. You don't have to check a box like in the other one that we didn't want to give to the lender, but you have to. It's presumed that you're going to do it, either an SPQ or an SSD, unless it's like a lender that's exempt or something, one of those exemptions. Okay, let me see. Okay, here's something else. This is spelled out somewhere else, but let me just say on number 5, 10A5, it says buyer shall, within the time frame specified in 14B1, that's where we're going to see it again, return signed copies of the disclosures to the seller, and that's 17 days. So at least we have a time limit on the buyer signing, which is good. So hopefully we're not chasing at the very end. Okay. Okay, just this isn't new, but on disclosures on 10D and E, the Megan's Law and the gas and hazardous liquid transmission pipelines, those, it's up to the buyer to check for those if they're concerned. So, okay, on to the next page, number F, talking about, yes, buyer's responsibility to check. I mean, obviously, if the seller knows something, they always have to disclose, but it's the buyer's responsibility. Okay, here on F, if you look at the last line on F, second to last and on to the last, the parties specified in paragraph 7, as directed by escrow, shall deposit funds into escrow or direct the HOA or management company to pay for any of the above. So this is where if the seller is to pay for the HOA documents, which they are, they can be asked to bring money in. I've talked to Patty about this. I don't know if they've made a firm decision on doing this, but this will take care of, the idea is, let's say it that way, the idea is that this will take care of those fights after cancellation. But that's, I know, but that's the intent. Let me just say that's the intent, is that it has been paid for. If the buyer has somehow agreed to it, then it would come out of the buyer's deposit. But if the seller, which it says in there, the seller will pay, then the seller will have to bring in funds to escrow if the escrow requests it.
And the buyer can do a notice to perform if we know that the seller has failed to bring in money, which means we can't get the HOA docs?
It's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the seller has to bring in money for the HOA docs regardless?
If the buyer requests, if escrow company requests it. It's putting...
It's going to be imminent because the state's going to, the seller will pay for the
yes.
by more than the
Mm-hmm.
So, again, this is all how, we don't know how it's going to play out, but looking at this, I would say, yes, it looks like the seller's going to need to bring in money for HOA docs and get it to the buyer in time to pay.
If you're working on a short sale or something where the seller has no...
That's a very good point.
When there's two HOAs...
Okay. Lori, can you write down on seller paying HOA, write down short sale, and write down notice to perform, just so I can remember to ask those questions. That's a good point.
Short sale also sometimes divorce situation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I suppose it could be written in somewhere that the buyer would pay that. Like on a short sale, you know if there's going to be a termite, the buyer paid for it. You know if there's going to be a home warranty, the buyer pays for it. I suppose that would be one way around it. But the point and the intent of the contract is to have the seller pay those funds up front, so it's already dealt with before. One thing, sorry.
If the buyer does cancel and you're going to have ticked off sellers, in the in canceling escrow, could you actually negotiate that? I'll sign the cancellation papers if you reimburse me.
I don't see why not.
You could do that.
And that's what's happening now, sort of, in a way. I mean, well, when people can't agree, they negotiate it.
Well,
yes.
When between whether it's the termite or this HOA is in an effort to solve problems before they happen. I think we've hashed over the termite enough. But on the HOA, as a listing agent, to call up or verify through escrow what those fees are.
Yes.
Put it in the listing contract. I don't know. Get a cashier's check or a check front and hold it in your file until the day you need it and hand it to escrow.
That might be a good, see, these are things we're going to sort out as we go. Right.
The seller has already agreed to pay this amount. I'll find out what it is.
You got to file that in the trust book, then make sure you get that done.
Yeah. Well,
If it's a personal check, then.
but still, if you're handling it, even if you're handling it, you have to put it in trust fund. Okay, Jane, what is your question?
Still the same.
Up till now, these documents have had to be pristine from the HOA to the escrow officer to the buyer. No agent could touch it, and certainly the seller couldn't touch any of the required documents. They had to be pristine.
Liability.
That's the law. And now there's nothing in here. In fact, it says that the seller can pay for them, get them, and take them to the buyer to escrow, but could simply provide them to the buyer.
I think it's always been, and I may be wrong on this, so let me just say, I think it's always been that the seller could give them to the buyer. We have always let escrow do that.
But Patty was always said that was talking about the liability.
Right.
Yes, the seller can hand you this, and you won't know whether page 4
I agree.
is missing.
I think that's why we let escrow do it.
Okay, but this contract, to her point, kind of, you know, if you're going to be the argumentative seller, you're going to say, I've got no obligation or no requirement for escrow to do this. I have these documents that when I bought the house in 1980, here it is.
That's right. And that's what one of our recent magazines.
But it says
magazines has said that a seller can just hand what they have if it's up to date.
But that civil code, right, that civil code does say it's got to be the current documents.
Right.
So, yeah.
Minutes.
Who determines that they're current?
Minutes. Last 30 days. Last 30 days.
Still need this one.
Do you want to write that? Do you know how to, just something about the fact of HOA docs going directly to seller versus through escrow? Okay. Okay, let's, we're going to table this for now because I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Our which one of our Realtor magazines actually stated that this is a problem.
Yeah.
And they said, in effect, good luck for agents working this one out.
It says right here,
Because they're no longer
free 12 months of
anymore.
HOA minutes. It says right on there.
Yeah.
I think we should make it a policy in the company that they be pristine.
Well, I think that's something we'll see what Brickstone, Brickstone will have to tell us how they're planning to handle it. I believe it also says in here, it also says in here somewhere that the seller can pay the funds directly to escrow or directly to the HOA. But see, escrow is going to be involved to be sure the complete package is ordered. I think in practice that's how it's going to work. But again, the point is that the escrow can ask the seller to bring the funds in. And how it's going to play up. I know, but I mean, it's like there's certain things because we haven't implemented anything yet, we're not quite sure. And to be honest, those are the two things I think that we're most unsure about how they're going to look in real life is the termite and the HOA. Those are the two things that we're going to have to sort out as we go. And of course, anything I learn, like when I take my full day class coming up, I get to do this for a whole day. I'll definitely share. I'll take a lot of good notes because I know you want to know everything about this. Okay. All right. Now, here's some good news. The number 13, the title is, oh, wait, I skipped. We're going to have some other news before we have good news. Sorry. Number 11, this is good news. It hasn't really changed much except they added as is and just, kind of clarified a couple of minor issues. So no big changes on that. Okay, no, I was skipping ahead. Number 12, we can't skip that because we're going back to termite now. This talks about the usual that the buyer can have investigations. They're encouraged to. They should. All those things. They can check out anything they want. And then if you look down about in the 5th line in the middle, it says any inspection for wood-destroying pests and organisms shall be prepared by a registered structural pest control company. Again, it says any, so you don't have to do it. So now it's included as part of the inspection. It shall cover the main building and attached structures. It doesn't include water tests. It's just going through. It doesn't cover the roof. If it's a condo, it's only that unit. Let's see. Shall not include common areas. It shall include a report that will be separated into sections evident of infestations and infections. Section 1 and Section 2. So that's where it kind of covers that issue. Okay, and I think that's basically it. It's just saying that the buyer can't let their inspector cause any damage to the property, but it says except to the extent required by a pest control report. So when they poke that thing in the eaves and there's a little hole, I guess that's legal because it says it right here. Okay, okay, cool. So we're good on, because we've already kind of discussed that issue, so I'm glad we're through that. And now the good news on number 13 is basically there have been very little changes on that. There's a little bit of tweaking of the words, but nothing of any major consequence. Okay. Let's move on to number 14. They kept number 14, which is good because we're all familiar with that being a real important one on the time frames. Okay, on A, basically it gives the buyer the right to cancel if the seller does not provide all these items under paragraphs 5, 6, 7, all those things, which I'll tell you what those are in a second. They're what you would expect. But if they don't provide those within 7 days, the buyer can cancel after giving a notice to perform. Wow. Now, the items are, I looked up the paragraphs for us. Anything on the addendum and advisory section, that's where you check those boxes where the SPQ used to be. Anything you've written in on other terms. Number 7 is inspection reports. Number 8B is the disclosure about any leased items. Number 10, A through F, or just all the disclosures. Number 11A is seller disclosure of material defects. And number 13A is the title. So our title companies have to make sure they get these in 7 days.
Does that mean if they ask for a termite report, we still have to have a termite report in 7 days?
It's because it's on number 7, inspection reports, yes. Mm-hmm.
That answers your question in regards to about 5 days turning your escrow instructions, because that's under 7.
Good point. But that for the seller. But then if the buyer doesn't sign, you can't cancel because the buyer hasn't signed. Neither party can cancel over that. But that's a good point. What Michelle just brought up is it covers if the seller doesn't sign their escrow instructions in 7 days. No, you're saying 5 days. Well, it's 5 days.
And they're stuck back in 5 days.
Yeah. But actually, escrow instructions are not in here. They're not one of those paragraphs. So I think this mostly, in long story short, it's mostly disclosures and reports. All those ones that I just read you.
Does it address homeowners?
That's not in this list. Hold on, let me double check. Let me just reread. No, because I went through each of those numbers, and that's what it was. I have a list.
You have to order it within 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
As long as they have proof that it's been ordered.
Correct. Okay, now number 14B is pretty much the same, that the buyer has 17 days to do all their investigations. But when we get to B2, yes, there's something new. B2 talks about requests for repairs. And it's not any big deal, but it's just kind of funny. Requests for repairs now looks like this. I didn't make a copy, but we can all look at it. All it is, you just have more lines to make your request. But then the middle, that's where it talks about termite. So it's got buyer requests seller pay for section 1, buyer requests seller pay for pay for section 2. You can check that or not. It's not written in stone. You can opt for those. If buyer requests either of those to be done, a seller shall no later than 5 days prior to close of escrow deliver to buyer written pest control certification. And then you also have the option to ask for a seller credit in general, or to reduce the price, just like in the old RR. Now, when the seller has a response, this is what you guys are going to like. It's no big deal, but it's just funny. The new form that they will use is an RRRR. I know. For some reason, I just think that's funny. It's called seller response and buyer reply to request for repair. And all this basically is like the bottom half of our current request for repair. It has a little bit more room. It says whether or not the buyer will do everything. They'll do everything except. They'll credit. They'll reduce the price. They'll remove a contingency. Or they don't agree to anything. And then the buyer can say yes or no. So basically they've just spread that form out into 2 forms. Request for repair is now RR or RRRR. And the only difference, which is kind of a big one, is the termite, which is on the request for repair. But that's it. So, okay. Let me see what I want to talk about next. Okay, let's just move on a little bit. Okay, then you'll just notice when we start talking about cancellation on C and D, they in some cases are grouping notice to buyer to perform and notice to seller to perform instead of doing separate paragraphs for those things. Basically, whoever wants to cancel has to give a notice to perform to the other person if they haven't performed. That's or in advance of non-performance. That's kind of the short version of that. Okay, now let's go down to, this is a little difference here on, make sure I'm on the right number again, number 14G, effective cancellation on deposits. Okay, in the bottom half of that paragraph, basically, I'll try to see if I can say this concisely. Basically, let me just read it. I thought I could paraphrase, but let's read it. Okay, if either party fails to execute mutual instructions to cancel, one party may make a written demand to escrow holder for the deposit. Escrow holder, upon receipt, shall promptly deliver notice of the demand to the other party. If within 10 days after escrow holder's notice, the other party does not object to the demand, escrow holder shall disperse the deposit to the party making the demand. If escrow holder complies with the preceding process, each party shall be deemed to have released escrow from liability, yada yada. So that potentially could prevent sometimes the escrow, remaining open forever. Although I am sure if someone really felt strongly about it, they would object. But it gives them the option. Let's say someone disappeared off the face of the earth, which has happened. You just can't find them. So as long as escrow follows this policy with giving notice, they can release the deposit in 10 days. So,
Claudia?
Yes.
On that close of escrow, they have this new form on here. I noticed.
Demand to close escrow?
Yes.
That's not a new form.
That's not good. It says that it's okay. Why did
That's okay.
it existed?
Okay, well let's talk about that for a second. Number F, going back to 14F, close of escrow. And there actually is something different on that, but I was kind of picking what I was going to cover. But on if you have someone who doesn't close on time, the correct form to use is a demand to close escrow, a DCE. It's not a notice to perform. And the difference on this now is that I think it used to say close within a reasonable time, and now it says at least 3 days after delivery. So that would be a form you'd use if someone is just dragging their feet on closing, whereas a notice to perform is used for most other things if they're not performing.
Well, and the notice to perform gives them the right to cancel when they don't perform.
Yes.
This does not give them that was the old.
That's a good point.
That was a notice to close escrow.
Yes.
You want to use because it doesn't give them the option to cancel.
Exactly. That's a good point. Yes.
And on the contingency release, we really are looking at 21 days now, isn't that right? I know everything's 17 except the loan, but I mean on the 20th day they can still back out. And when we talk to our sellers, and now we always say 17 days.
Right.
We're really saying 21 days.
Well, right, because as long as they have one contingency, they can use it. But although I didn't really want to get into too much detail about this because it can be a long discussion, but something Gov really hit hard in our class was that you are supposed to have a legitimate reason to cancel. So in that case, I mean, maybe it would be hard to prove, but let's say they signed off on everything else on 17th day, and then they said, oh, can't get the loan. If there was every reason to believe they could get that loan and they just use it as an excuse, technically the seller could hold them to the contract. Now, again, proving it, that's a whole other thing. But he really explained that in more detail than I understood previously. So that's another class. Okay.
I'm sorry, Claudia.
Yes.
Back to 14G. Says if the other party does not object to the demand, doesn't say how. Is it like a phone call?
Well, I would we'd have to ask escrow. Oh, I know the answer to that. Escrow says in their instructions that all instructions have to be in writing. So I think it would be covered in the escrow instructions.
And does it need to be on a specific form, or can it just be something that's written?
There's no form noted, so I guess it would be whatever escrow requires. I think it would be the escrow company's.
So if they just write up a letter, an email, and sign it and send it in, that should be adequate, or we have to start battling over forms?
That's their problem.
Not that I don't see any reference to any form, so it would appear that it wouldn't matter the form. You know, it could be a letter, unless escrow has something specific they want. Yeah.
To Jim's comment, so we're now just going to say that everything's going to close in 21 days now. I mean, we're going to get all the stuff done in 21 days.
It's not going to close in 21 days. You meant okay? I think what
all the contingencies they're now doing 21 days because someone rewrote it that way.
No. I don't think that's what he meant. What I think Jim was saying was, you know, if you have somebody sign off on every contingency except one contingency on the 5th day, and they have 30 days to sign off on that other one, technically you're pretty much at risk until that 30th day when they really sign off. I think that's what he meant. Not that legally they have until then. And I think, and also there's room to change that. You can make the loan contingency 15 days. You can make the inspection contingency
I
10 days.
You can do that, but my comment is, you know, it's already 17 days. That's halfway through. You go to 21 days. We have the holiday situation now. All of a sudden, it's 24 days before someone has to release it, and you're closing in 30. So my comment is, from a listing agent's perspective, that's horrible.
I think a lot of people are going to shorten it. I think,
but that's what I'm saying is the burden ends up being that it's on the seller, and the buyer just sits out there, and we're seeing so many of them that wait till day 17 or whatever it ends up being. But you know, I'm just commenting back as, I mean, gosh, 17, you really, I think, even though it says 21, from a... If you have an owner-occupied property and the seller is waiting to plan their move, it's a challenge. Yeah. But, okay, so here's a question. Travis, does CAR have a comment line? Just kidding. For these kind of things. Because, I mean, we don't get to make these decisions, but I think some of these comments would be good. So, but it's good food for thought for, like, discussions at classes. So, anyway. Okay, let's move on. Number 16, we'll zip through some of this. Number 16 about repairs. The only thing new in here is it just specifies, kind of sort of in the middle towards the bottom, that the seller will provide invoices and paid receipts for repairs. We've all been doing that forever, but it's just specified. Not any big change there. Move down to number 17 is fine. Number 18, they've got another paragraph here, 18B, our scope of duty. This is just another like protection for us of saying what we are expected to do and what we are not expected to do. So you can read that at your convenience. It's not anything all that drastically new. Number 19 is something new. There's a form, an RCSA form, which is, I have it. Oh, thank you, Susan. I forgot I have it in here. So, yeah. Duh. It's an easy thing, and it's an optional thing. But if you have someone, let's say somebody's got power of attorney, and every time they sign, they have to write John Smith as attorney in fact for Mary Smith, and all that. If you have, and this could be for trustees, for corporate officers like of an LLC or a corporation that owns. Basically, this just says that if you fill out this form that says John Smith is a trustee, that he doesn't have to write trustee every single time he signs. That's all it is. Not a big deal, but it's another form that for a lot of people will just make life a little bit easier. Okay, on number 20, we're back to escrow again, but kind of in the middle, right above B, this is where it says, as directed by... buyer and seller will execute additional instructions, documents, forms provided by escrow that are reasonably necessary to close escrow, and as directed by escrow holder within 3 days shall pay to escrow holder or HOA management company or others any fee required by paragraph 7, 10, or elsewhere in this agreement. So that's where it says you could have the seller pay the funds directly to the HOA. When it says or others, maybe that's like Condo Certs, you know, that company that charges a fortune and compiles everything, or it could be escrow. So it's putting a time frame on it.
to try to move things along. And just on this paragraph, let me just finish on B. At the bottom of B, it just spells out that escrow holder can be a qualified substitute for the FERPTA issue, which is, instead of having your clients fill out an AS, an affidavit of non-foreign status, you can let escrow sign something saying they're checking on that for you, and they're making sure that you're complying with the law. Jane.
Within 3 days of what? What am I?
Acceptance, I believe.
Once you have a contract.
Acceptance?
Then they got
I think everything is general acceptance, yeah. Oh, thanks. Okay.
Doesn't say it.
So Claudia, we should just prepare our listings when we get the listing that you're going to need to write a check for the HOA stuff. Like what we have one right now is $1,230 for the HOA docs. So
Yeah.
Just helping to get a check ready for it. As soon as we sell the house, have that money ready to go to escrow.
If escrow's going to if escrow's going to comply with this, yes, absolutely. And just as an aside, not to cause any more problems, but my concern about that is in some cases certain things can't be used again. Mm-hmm. And I think for these buyers that frivolously cancel on the 16th day, that's going to be not a popular situation. But again, we haven't implemented it, so we're figuring it out as we go. But I'll try to ask more questions about that. And I think Patty, I've talked to Patty about it. She's aware of it. And I think she is figuring out exactly how she's going to do it if you use Brickstone. So
you have to let us know.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to have another training before this becomes, in effect. And Patty is on vacation right now, but she can be there at that, and we'll talk about it. And I don't know if we'll go through it line by line like this, but we'll at least talk about issues or major changes that we need to talk about.
We'll also need to inquire whether it be personal check, cashier's check, personal check takes.
Very good point. Very good point. Marie's question was whether that check would need to be a personal check or a cashier's check for escrow to be able to order. So, good. She's got it. Lori's writing. Okay, let's move on to number 21. Okay, there's a new paragraph, or a new clause, I should say, 21A, that goes with liquidated damages. Talked to CAR about this because I just wanted to be sure I had this straight. Basically, it just says that you can't have a provision related to the deposit that would violate liquidated damages. And what he gave me two examples. One would be like that the deposit would be that is released. Like if you had an early release of a deposit, for example, it couldn't be more than 3% because the maximum liquidated damages is 3%. So that would violate liquidated damages. That's one example he gave me. And the second example he gave me is if you were releasing funds prior to closing, that it would have to be in connection with contingency removals. So that's what I know. I've asked as many questions as I could think of, but basically I don't know that this is going to come up for us this much because we don't typically write offers with non-refundable deposits, and if you look at the example, or release or forfeiture of a deposit, usually it is governed by liquidated damages in our world, I think, but I guess that was a problem for someone and they added a paragraph. So
apartments are different.
Pardon me?
Apartments are different and they're not owner-occupied.
Good point. Good point. Okay. Then no super major changes in number 22. They've added a little bit of wording, just specifying about mediation, arbitration, but nothing major there to really delve into. The next page on number 26, I don't know that this applies to many of us, but our old purchase agreement said that you could assign the sale to someone else. This now is changed to where you cannot assign the sale to someone else without first getting a separate written consent from the seller. So if one buyer somehow changes his mind and wants to assign it to his brother or something of that nature, or maybe to a trust or an LLC maybe or something, then it can't be done without written consent. So and it's unlikely a seller would have a problem with that as long as they know. So anyway. Okay, they added language about equal housing. No, nothing too new. Okay, then down at the very bottom, we have one or more buyers signing this agreement if you would check a box if this is applicable, is in a representative capacity. That's set using that form if you're a trustee or if you're a corporate officer or a power of attorney, someone with power of attorney. It's just referencing that you're using that. So, and we have gotten to the 10th page. And before you ask, one question. Greg, did I answer your question? Do you remember what it was?
Well, first of all, you did a great job.
You did do it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
And yeah.
Okay, good. I couldn't remember what it was. So, okay. I moved on and I thought, I hope I covered it.
You're doing great.
I was 90% sure I was going to, so, okay, Jim, what?
The seller depositing money for HOA fees, this has me. Could language be developed so that somewhere in other terms there could be something to the effect that if the buyer cancels, they'll reimburse the seller?
Yeah, that's good.
It's something that should come up with language that will, maybe we can all use.
Yeah.
There's
So
a
we're not making
lot of
it up.
escrow companies that already have that in place.
Oh, they do.
That they send out a form when they first open escrow stating that both buyer and seller are aware that if the buyer or seller back out, that so-and-so is responsible.
No, but what Brickstone does, it says, as agreed separately in the contract.
That's what it does.
And in the contract, it says the seller's agreed to pay for it. Now you're running into the problem where it's come out of the deposit, and now the buyer wants to be reimbursed. I have it happening right this very second.
Yes.
We resold it, said, hey, we'll pay you when we close the other deal, and they don't want it, they want to shut down.
You're going to have to count it.
But if we did have something, we could all use it and we know it'll.
And you know, and I don't, yes, that's a good idea. And also, and I know if we're working with the buyer, we don't always get to pick the escrow company, but maybe that's something Brickstone can work on as well, at least for those escrows. But Lori, if you can write that down about verbiage on that.
Brickstone's using, it authorizes money to be used.
Correct.
But it doesn't say who ultimately will be responsible.
If the buyer cancels.
If they cancel.
That's critical. Yeah.
But it allows
Yeah.
There was one that you just did a couple escrows, Susan did a couple escrows ago. If they had to have that signed.
Yes.
You have?
Remember, escrow doesn't make rules, it takes instruction.
Right.
So, an escrow can't tell you what they're going to do. You instruct them what you want.
Hey, Travis, are you going to try and have some meetings with other brokers? Because it'll be nice if other agents were sort of all talking about, like, how are you going to be writing this?
We just discussed that today.
So that when, you know, the big companies, when they're coming in, like, they're not going in a completely different direction with how they're wording things. Their counteroffers are going to be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so, but in terms of everyone's kind of like, hey, we're down here, we're thinking, we're going to write it here, we're going to write that, or at least see what other people are thinking when they're reading stuff. Yeah. That would be really helpful.
Can I just say that at the class we took so far, it was, most of the questions were much like what yours are. So I think we're all on the same page of like sorting this out in our minds and how it's, you know, trying to figure out how we're going to make it look. And I'm hoping when I take that full day class, I mean, it should give me even more detail, but I do agree, I think talking to other brokers is going to be key. Yeah, local ones, exactly.
Sort of thinking on the same page.
Yeah.
They're not thinking, oh no, the buyer's definitely going to take this.
Sure. Yes.
We used to have a form, Travis, that talked about if RE/MAX was broker-owned form, if we wanted to address.
You mean the affiliated business?
Right.
We still have that.
Okay, well, if they added to that form, which was included with your purchase contract, that if the buyer backs out, then they would be liable for the fees for the homeowners association. That's one way to slip it in there, and it would be always there in writing.
Okay, I'm going to do devil's advocate with you. That's the RE/MAX form.
Correct.
Okay, then you've got Realty One. Therefore,
I understand. It's going to be a nightmare for a while. It's going to be a nightmare, but not everybody's going to have it.
I want to slip things in. I want to be great.
Well, there's that. We're trying to keep them out of the loop as much as possible. Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.